Hi everyone, it's Miss Simmons again. This is a screencast for units 1 through 3, specifically talking about migration and immigration for those units. Once again, Unit 1 is from 1492 to 1607, so that's pre-British colonization. Unit 2 is 1607 to 1754, so that's British colonization before the Revolutionary War time period. And Unit 3 is 1754 to 1800, so it's the American Revolution period and the Constitution period up to Jefferson being elected. So let's talk about migration in those 3 units. First of all, we can go all the way back to the first humans who migrated over to the Americas. That's roughly happening at about 15,000 BCE. There are several different theories about how humans came over to the Americas. One of them that's most prominent is the idea that during the Ice Age, that there was a land bridge created between Russia and what is now Russia and Alaska, and people migrated that way. There's also theories that people came from Polynesia and also were in small boats and went up and down over long periods of time the west coast of the Americas and migrated and settled in that way. We are starting to see around 8,000 BCE that we're slowly having those humans who came over largely because they were hunting and gathering societies following big game over into the Americas. Now we're starting to see the first evidence that humans in the Americas are also cultivating corn or maize. Same thing. And the 2 big, huge crops in the Americas that are developing here are maize and also potatoes, different types of potatoes. We are also going to see with that migration that there is a real mix in many societies between hunting and gathering societies and also agriculture. The Iroquois Confederacy is an example of that because they definitely were maize farmers. They are located in what is today kind of the Great Lakes region in upstate New York and up into Canada, and they farmed corn or maize there as well as were hunting and gathering societies. One of the other things we can also see with the migration is with the Europeans coming in, we see the Columbian exchange and that migration of not only humans, but goods coming from Europe, Africa, and Asia into the Americas, and goods from the Americas going over to Europe, Africa, and Asia is really going to impact the population of both areas. It's going to have a devastating impact on the population of the Americas, the Native American population, because of the import of disease, most notably smallpox and influenza. We are also seeing populations grow, specifically in Europe, with the introduction of new foods like corn and potatoes, and also things like tomatoes and chocolate. Sugar is going to be introduced from the Afro-Eurasia area into especially the Caribbean, and we're going to see the impact of that is going to be that slaves will be brought over from Africa to grow that sugar in the Caribbean, and that is a huge part of the migration of these units. We see millions of Africans being brought over to the Americas and hundreds of thousands specifically brought into what will eventually become the United States. This slave trade is our forced migration from this time period. And again, they're in large part, Africans are in large part are brought over to grow sugar in the Caribbean. They're also going to start to grow things like tobacco. Indentured servants to places like Virginia and Maryland and Delaware and the Carolinas are also a huge part of the migration that's happening between 1600 and 1750. The heaviest concentration of indentured servants is really going to be in that first 100 years of British settlement. And those people are here to do labor as well. They have their passage paid for, and in return for their passage paid for, they get to work for 7 years without being compensated. At the end of those 7 years, then they're given some sort of land if they survive those 7 years. And so that's our indentured servitude migration. The impact, again, on the Amerindian population is major devastation, mainly from disease, also warfare, but the biggest killer of Amerindians is disease, and estimates range around the idea that somewhere around 90% of all Amerindians who once existed on the east coast of North America and in the Caribbean are going to be killed off due to that disease, which is highly relatable today as to why we have this whole closing down of society, because we're trying to slow down that spread of new disease that people do not have immunities to. Without that slowing down of contact, this is what's going to really wipe out many Amerindians. Different diseases, different time period, clearly. In 1763, as the British are continually wanting to push westward, the British, following the French and Indian War, are going to establish that proclamation line of 1763 that tries to limit migration westward because they want to be able to control the conflict that is continually happening in westward areas between British colonists and Amerindians or Native Americans, and that proclamation line sets up a zone for Native Americans to kind of have their own free land in that land that the British gained from the French. And so that proclamation line is essentially the Appalachian Mountains, and it creates that zone of land between the Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi River, saying that no British colonists should move there. That's pretty much violated in many places, the Paxton Boys being one example of that. But you do see in this colonial period this real idea that the British have a sense that they want to take over that land so that they can economically benefit and continue to farm. Shays' Rebellion is also having to do with that idea of westward migration. Shays' Rebellion is happening in western Massachusetts, of poor farmers who have their land to the west and they feel like the government of the east really isn't representing their particular needs. And so they rebel against that government. They're an example of that westward migration, and poor people tending to settle further west. The establishment, the east, the wealthy people, the people who control government are largely in the east. And last, having to do with migration and immigration, when our government is established, one of the things that is a success under the Articles of Confederation is the sense of a Northwest Ordinance and also the Land Ordinance of 1785 and 1787. These two are a way to divide up the new land that the United States government has, and it establishes that you're going to have schools in that Northwest Territory. It also says slavery is not going to be allowed in the Ohio River Valley of that Northwest Territory. And most important, it establishes a way for a territory to become a state. Thank you guys. I have another one to make for you. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.